Good afternoon, everybody. A good Erev Shabbos. It's nice. I'm almost home. I'm very excited. I've been home all week. It's a very special Shabbos. It's the Shabbos of Shlisel Challah. My wife looks forward to all the year long. And as much as many of my friends, might question the practice of Shlisel Challah, something being perhaps superstitious and perhaps even forbidden according to some opinions, I'm sorry to say, I will humbly follow a minhag if the Satmarav followed it. I don't have to be, I know Reb Nachman Breslover spoke about not being too sophisticated, but rather to be simple. And in my simplicity, I simply and humbly follow this minhag, although I do not believe it should be taken in a superstitious way. I do believe it should be understood as a cute custom and maybe a way to pray to God. We see such a thing that the prophets would often, especially Ezekiel, Chezkel, and Avi, would be commanded to do superficial actions to demonstrate, and Isaiah did the same thing. Many of the prophets engaged in certain superficial actions in order to make a statement, a spiritual statement. And I would say that, if someone, God forbid, believes that putting a key in the challah or making the challahs in the shape of the key and so forth actually brings you parnasa, then they should not engage in such an activity. But if someone believes that God is the only one who can give us parnasa, and one perhaps creatively or in an interesting way demonstrates his faith in God by following a rather strange and outlandish and somewhat fun custom, I don't really have a problem with that. The Nadverna minhag is very interesting, is to make something quite in the shape of a matzah and to take a key, ideally the key to the Aron Kodesh, to the Holy Ark where the Torahs are held, but if not that, some other key, perhaps a key to the synagogue or whatever, or like I said, just some other key, and make holes in this flatbread in the shape of the matzah, and to say the tefillah that's from the Yerushalmi that said on Motzei Shabbos, mentioning all the different gates, Shari Ora, Shari Arachim, Bashanim, and so forth. It goes in the Seder Aleph base, it goes in alphabetical order, mentioning various gates that are open every week, particularly on Saturday night, that we ask God to open these gates. Whatever that means, it's found in the Jerusalem Talmud, this prayer. And the Nadverna Rebbes, and even though I'm not a Nadverna Rebbe, but I'm a shtikla Nadverna Chassid. I'm a Chassid of, I'm actually more of a Kalavar Chassid. You ask me who my Rebbe is, the Kalavar Rebbe, but I'm a big Chassid in a sense, in a Chassid little c sense, I would say, or little h sense, or little ches, even though there's no little ches, of a lot of the Nadverna Rebbes. And the fact is, some of Berchi Nadverna was in Satmar, so it's quite shaykh that my ancestors who lived in Satmar had the shaykhs to Nadverna, which they probably didn't, but maybe they did, I don't know. Whereas they had no shaykhs to Samarov, because Samarov came to Satmar after my ancestors came to America. But that being said, I still have a devotion to Samarov also. But all of this combined, just what I'm saying, is that I do like this minhag that I try to do all the different shlisel chalas, making the key in the challah, making the key in the shape of the challah, making the imprint of the key on the challah, making little shapes of keys and putting on top of the challah, and this one, the Nadverna minhag of taking something in the shape of a matzah and making the holes and saying the prayer for Motzei Shabbos on Erev Shabbos and doing this. Hopefully when I get home I'll have time to do this. My wife is making challah dough as we speak, or well, she made it already and she's letting the dough rise. And obviously something like that is a prayer to God, and it's not a superstitious action, but it might still be superficial without being superstitious. And the thing is, we can take a level of superficiality and put depth into our life. So there's a lot what to discuss with these things. I always like, it's parshas shmini this week. I always like to share a Dvar Torah I'm quite proud of. It's a shtikla chiddush that I made, and I've been saying this over for years. I think it's already from when I was a bacher, and I've made videos of this before, but I enjoy this Dvar Torah very much, so I'd like to share it with you all. I'll be intellectually honest. It's because I'm proud of it, and there's nothing really wrong with that. If we're spreading Torah and we're getting inspiration through that as well, and I'm inspired by this, and I'm thankful to God that, however this came to my mind. Obviously, I believe in hashgacha pratis. That's to a very high level, even if I'm not always cognizant of that hashgacha pratis. I try to believe in such hashgacha pratis. One of my mashpiyim, one of my rebbeim, Reb Pinchas Rumpler Shlita, Shtikl Tzadik Nister, he wrote a kuntris explaining the concept of hashgacha pratis, to say that, and this is maybe it's his chiddush a little bit, that the chiddush of Chasidus, that the thing that he found only in Chasidus Sfarim, that he didn't find in previous Sifrei Kabbalah, is that hashgacha pratis goes even on the thoughts that we think on our own, meaning that God is in control of everything, even the thoughts that we have that are our own thoughts are still a matter of divine providence, that God provides us with our thoughts that we think on our own, whatever that means. I mean, it's a little bit difficult to wrap your mind around, but if you think about it, it does make sense in a certain way. So it's not to say that everything is nevuah. Or Ruach HaKodesh. What it means to say is that God is guiding us even when we make mistakes. That's certainly an Ishbitzer theology. But even in other Sifrei Chasidus also we find this idea. It's a difficult idea, but there is what to say about it. And like we said, the story of Rabbi from Stralis, that like we said, it's kfira if we don't have an overwhelming amount of belief in hashgacha pratis. That the Kal Rebbe Shlita brought recently in the Dvar Torah, and it's an old story. So the chiddush and Kolman the Talmud Vosik got Chadash. So there's Indian. So it's a chiddush. I'm just making a sushtel, really very simple sushtel with two different things. One is a Dvar Torah and one is a liturgical piece. It's not that much of a big chiddush, but the way it's presented to me, it gives me a lot of chizuk, it gives me a lot of inspiration. So I've said this over many times. The Mekdushas Levi, Berditchev V'Rov, on that in parshas Shmini it says, excuse me, it says that Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe al Aharon Leimer Aleihem, that God spoke to Moses and to Aaron in order to speak to them, and then it goes on to say Zosachaya, these are the animals that you can eat, and these animals you can't eat. So the laws of keeping kosher, not all of the laws, but the laws of kosher animals and not kosher animals. Back in New York for the first time since early Monday morning, Fartugs. Just crossed over the bridge, Delaware River. So, Kedushas Levi asks, Rashi addresses this and so forth. What is this Leimer Aleihim? And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in order to say to them, we have an idea that there's nothing extra in Torah. So, if God's spoken to Moses and Aaron, what is this? Say, speak unto the children of Israel, in order to say to them. What is this? In order to say to them, Leimer Aleihim. What is that? It seems superfluous, but we have a general rule that there's nothing superfluous in Scripture. So how do we reconcile that? So the Rashi has his answer. Kedushas Levi has a very beautiful answer, and it almost seems to be pshat. It's obviously a level of drush, but it's a level of drush that almost seems to have pshat significance. It almost seems to be a simple meaning in the way that even though it's totally homiletical, and that is that you are what you eat. And there's essentially three elements to this Torah. The first is that Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, we have a medrash. It's in the Scripture in Exodus that Moses was nursed by his own mother. That the Egyptian princess adopted Moses, and she also became his mother in a certain level. And Judaism does recognize adoption as being a valid form of being a parent from a biblical standpoint. We do see in Chronicles that Bithia, the Egyptian princess, was Moses' mother in a certain sense as well, but we'll put that aside for now. She was not his biological mother, and his biological mother, Yocheved, Jochebed is how they say it sometimes in English, although it's not a name you hear so often. That Yocheved was, that's one of those names that even though in English it's Jochebed, nobody says Jochebed. It's like Achashverosh, in English is Ahasuerus, and most people don't say Ahasuerus, they'll say Xerxes a lot of times, they'll use the Greek name, and most Jews just say Achashverosh. Very rarely do you hear anybody say Ahasuerus. I'm not even saying it right, it's so difficult to say, and I kind of pride myself on being able to pronounce all of these English transliterations as sometimes accurate they are and sometimes inaccurate as they are. That being said, excuse me. So the Egyptian princess in Scripture tells us that Miriam, the sister of Moses, approached the Egyptian princess and said, maybe I'll get you a Hebrew woman who is nursing to nurse this baby for you. And of course it was his own mother who nursed him, his own biological mother who nursed him as a service to his adopted mother. Again, there is certainly a place for adoption in the Jewish tradition, even though there are certainly controversies around the halachic ramifications of adoption. But that being said, still there is what to talk about adoption. But that's not my point. The point is that what do the rabbis say? What does the Medrash say? Essentially, a legend is that the Egyptian princess Bithia, as she's referred to, Bithia, in the Book of Chronicles in Devrei Yamim, she brought, she was not nursing, so she's looking for a wet nurse. As was a very common way of feeding babies in the old days, was through wet nurses that were not the baby's mother, and that was something women did for a living. They would nurse babies, other people's babies. Nowadays it's pretty much unheard of, but in the old days it was very, very common. So she tried the Egyptian nursemaids. Now, according to Jewish law, a Jewish baby is allowed to be nursed by a non-Jewish woman under certain circumstances. It's not considered to be not kosher. It's not really a consideration vis-a-vis Jewish law. There are other issues, the question of, were ancient pagans murderers, which they quite often were, and were they anti-Semitic? Did they want to murder Jewish babies? They quite often did. And so those type of questions were addressed by our rabbis, and those type of questions depended on the culture you were dealing with. Nowadays, that's not a consideration, because we don't have people like that who just wantonly murder a Jewish baby just because they could get away with it. But in ancient Rome, absolutely, there were people like that. Not everybody, but there were people like that, and they could get away with it. They probably wouldn't face any retribution if they did that in ancient Rome, because it was such a wicked society and a debauched society. But let's put that aside. Despite the fact that it is totally kosher according to Jewish law for a Jewish baby to nurse from a non-Jewish woman, yet Moses, it wasn't maybe a legal issue, but he was on a very high spiritual level, even as a baby. And what they were saying is that the mouth that is destined to have the divine presence speak through its throat cannot be nursing from an unclean source. And so if the Egyptian woman is eating non-kosher foods, which most likely was true, that's going to go into her bloodstream, that's going to go into her milk, and even though technically it'll be kosher, there is this indirect aspect of being fed from a non-kosher source, even indirectly, that Moses was not allowed to be taken from, even though it was, a stringency above and beyond the letter of the law. Of course, it was before the Torah was given, but you can't imagine that it was stricter before the Torah was given, although there is what to discuss, that certain things actually were stricter before the Torah was given, and that certain things actually were made to be less strict, were relaxed. Certain laws were relaxed through Torah, and were relaxed actually for the whole world. The main one that Chassam Sofer talks about as a possibility, and others talk about, is that animal milk, is that considered aver min achai? Is that considered a limb taken from a living animal? We certainly don't consider it to be as such, but there is an opinion that before the Torah was given at Sinai, it was actually forbidden for non-Jews to eat the milk of an animal. And it was only because the Torah essentially told us about this, that it became a thing, that it became permitted, even that once the Torah said you cannot eat milk and meat together, that shows that milk is something you can eat. And that milk by itself is kosher, and therefore it became thus kosher even for the non-Jews who were forbidden to eat it before that. That's not everyone agrees, excuse me, whether that's true or not, although it is interesting that there's a history of milk consumption being a relatively modern development, which could point to the truth of this actually being a historical truth. It doesn't necessarily have to be so. If it's not really a dogmatic issue. If it's not the case that people did not eat dairy products before the Torah was given, most likely they certainly did. It's just that they were perhaps committing a sin before the Torah was given, according to certain opinions, and then later it wasn't. It was no longer a sin, and today is not a sin. Again, we could argue about these things, but the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of human beings on planet Earth are lactose intolerant on some level. Absolutely lactose intolerant on the level of fresh milk. That most people in the world, something like 70% of human beings on Earth, cannot fully handle digesting, drinking milk. However, many, if not most of those, and most people in the world, even those who are lactose intolerant, among those there are different types of lactose intolerance, and there are those who can eat yogurts and cheeses, but cannot drink milk. Those type of issues. We're going to put that aside for now. We're going to get back to this, although I remember once meeting a Native American chief who has since passed away. He was called Beaver Chief, very colorful, interesting character, who said it was not part of the Native American culture, at least not in his tribe and not in many tribes, to consume dairy products that come from animals. That just was not part of their culture, which is a fascinating thing vis-a-vis this Sam Sofer. The only idea of milk was that a baby nursed from his mother, and that was it. There was no such concept of milking a cow or a goat or a deer or a pig or a horse or whatever you want to milk. To consume that milk for a human being, that was for the baby cows or whatever to drink, not for us to take from them. Obviously, we have bred cattle today that produce such a surplus of milk that all the babies, that all the calves they could have, could never drink that much milk. That's just via selective breeding what we've produced in the Western world, and that's why it is totally humane to eat milk products, and actually inhumane to avoid milking the cow because it's going to cause them pain. I mean, you could ask about the morality of selective breeding, but it's part of agriculture. Again, we're going on major tangents. Let's get back to our subject. So basically, Moses, because he was going to be the one who God is speaking through, he would have to be on a very high spiritual level, and he could not be nursing from, even indirectly, from a non-kosher source. And the connection that the Kedushas Levi brings us to the Ramban HaKadosh, Nachmanides, who who says that you are what you eat. The animals that we eat are docile and friendly and nice animals, and the animals that we don't eat are quite cruel and dangerous animals. The pig is a cruel, dangerous, man-eating animal. I mean, it's been said that if certain gangster groups, organized crime groups, wanted to dispose of the remains of their victims, they would feed them to the pigs, because the pigs would eat everything, skin and bones and teeth and hair and everything. And so, it was processed then into quite a different state. No matter what Troy McClure says, a cow will not eat you and everyone you love. If it had the chance, a pig would. If it was that hungry, for sure. I mean, the regular pigs that you have in the farm are well fed, and that's why they generally do not attack people, although they can, and sometimes do. But if they were hungry, you better believe that a poor pig will take his tusks and slice open a man and brutally kill him and brutally and eat all the remains. And so that's why we don't eat something like that, because that's not something, if you are what you eat. Like my friend Eitan Mordechai, he said that's why we eat shirayim, because the Tanya says you should feel like shirayim, you should be so humble, you should feel like leftovers, like nothing. And so therefore you are what you eat. And so if you eat shirayim, it'll make you humble. And it is a humbling experience to eat the leftovers of another person. But again, we'll put that aside. On so many tangents here. So the Ramban says you are what you eat, and so sheep are nice, docile, a cute little shefala, lemala, a little baby lamb is a docile, cute little animal that eats grass, and that kind of friendly, docile, meek way of living is something that's important. I remember the Shidlovtzer Rebbe Shlita told me one of the first Shabbos I went to his house for a Shabbos Suda. He said, in America they didn't eat salmon because it tastes good, but in Eretz Yisrael we eat the salmon because we want to get musar out of it. And again, you are what you eat. That the salmon goes against the current, and if we want to ingest that, and that spirit of being able to not just go with the flow, but know when is time to go with the flow and when is time to go against the current, as the salmon does. Cute idea. So let's get back to the Kedushas Levi. So we have these two ideas when it comes to keeping kosher, that Moshe Rabbeinu, in order to be worthy to be a prophet, had to keep a very high level of kosher, and so too the you are what you eat from the Ramban, the Kedushas Levi brings. So then we're going to go a little bit further into this. The Kedushas Levi brings from the Navi Yoel. The prophet Joel says like this: if it says in the prophet Joel, that your sons and daughters will prophesy, and young men and old men will see visions. That in the end times, that when Messiah comes, when Mashiach comes, we will all be prophets. That's a pretty major thing. And so therefore, if we're going to be prophets, we better be keeping kosher, right? Excuse me. So if we are going to be prophets, we got to keep kosher. And so that's what it means. In order to these animals you can eat, in order to say to them, so the Kedushas Levi says that it means that the path to receiving prophecy is keeping kosher. So then let's go a bit further with this. That's the Adkan Divrei Kedushas Levi. Now my chiddush that I want to add to it. I don't know about you all, but I didn't always keep kosher. And even a lot of folks who try their best to keep kosher. I mean, can you imagine what it was like in Muncie some years ago when this guy was feeding tarfus? This is a story going back, I don't know, 16 years ago maybe, that there was someone in Muncie who was feeding he was a butcher and he was selling non-kosher chicken and claiming it to be kosher. Right, you can make a whole discussion. There's a machlokas whether or not chickens have to be shechted and things like that. We all agree it's at least a rabbinical requirement and most likely a biblical requirement that birds have to be shechted in order to be eaten, for sure, according to rabbinical. There's nice. Doing white leg. Saying to heimische Punnen was a days. Erev Shabbos is a spät. Comes on. I'm saying was Titzach. Do in the Gegen. So anyway, you can imagine there were people who were Holocaust survivors who were Meiser Nefesh. They starved themselves during the Holocaust not to eat treif. And here, a Yid in Muncie wanted to make a few extra dollars, and he was feeding treif to. It's a horrible, horrible thing. So does that mean we get left out when it comes to prophecy when Mashiach comes because we are because we didn't always keep kosher? So the answer I have is as follows. In the liturgy for Shalosh Shudas, printed in some Siddurim and some benchers, not in all, obviously, but in many it is printed. There is a little L'Shem Yichud, a little formula, a little piece of liturgy that says as follows, that in the merit of these three meals, B'schus Shalosh Shudas Elam, Yisukin Mash B'gamti, B'machlos Asuras, that the merit of these three meals that we ate on Shabbos, and of which this is the third meal, God should fix that which we damaged by not eating kosher. So therefore, eating on Shabbos, all three meals, not just Shalosh Shudas, but all three that we eat, is a rectification for not eating kosher. But that also means, therefore we can kind of extrapolate that as well, that when we are eating on Shabbos, because let's face it, we might every now and then maybe it's batal b'shisha, maybe maker adin. It's fine, but who knows? So what do we do? And the answer is, we do the best we can, and on Shabbos we pray that God should forgive us if we accidentally ate something we shouldn't have. That being said, go a little further. No matter what, we see that there's this connection. That essentially eating on Shabbos is an investment into prophecy. When the time comes that we will be prophets, whenever that is, might be today, might be tomorrow, might be 1,000 years from now. It doesn't really matter. When it happens, that investment that we did by eating on Shabbos will be something. That's the first part. But more than that, God transcends time and space. So therefore, essentially, it doesn't matter when it's going to be. In a certain sense, what we're experiencing at the moment, right now, is an expression of prophecy. When we eat on Shabbos, we are involved in what, like the Piasetzner would call the avodas hanevuah, that there is a devotion, a divine service of living a prophetic lifestyle, of being engaged in prophetic activity. Doesn't mean we're going to hear prophecy the way the prophets of the Bible heard prophecy. But what it means is that we are engaged in a prophetic ministry while we eat on Shabbos. And for sure, whether it's in the sense of making an investment for the future, or it's in the sense of an active devotion. I had a lot of other things to talk about today, but that was basically the Dvar Torah I want to bring out. I had something to say about a speech that I heard that Donald Trump gave about Israel. I didn't hear it yet, so I really shouldn't comment on it before I listen to it. And that's about it. Even though I might have what I want to talk about, we can leave that aside for another time. I'm still very appreciative of everything the president does. It was nice in Scranton to see a Chassidish Yid with payas. I just left the mikveh. I'm in the car, driving along, seeing a man, a construction worker, something, or some kind of a hard-working Ingerman, but a real Chassidish Ingerman, who I believe must live there in the area. That was a refreshing thing to see. It's something we often see in our area, but it's interesting to see that in Scranton. So thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. All the best.